Hello again. One of the many things which I find irritating about middle class white liberals is the way in which they apply special rules to and bend over backward to make allowances for black people who do bad things. If they did but realise it, this is offensive, for it shows that they don't really think that people of African origin should be held to the same standards as everybody else. For my own part, I expect black, yellow and brown people to be every bit as prone to greed, dishonesty and violence as white people. Many of the more progressive white people are unable to see this. If a white person commits a racist assault, then the full force of the law should descend upon that person. If, on the other hand, a black person injures somebody in the course of a street robbery, then the poor fellow must have been driven to his desperate act due to poverty or being unable to get a job due to systemic racism. It's much the same in the international arena. I assume that black politicians in Africa will, like white ones in Britain and the United States, help themselves to as much loot as they can get away with without being detected. I also assume that, like most white statesmen, black Africans have many prejudices based on grounds of ethnicity or tribe. If they think that a reasonable excuse presents itself and it is to their advantage, well then politicians of all countries will start wars or massacre those whom they dislike or mistrust. This is of course what the white nations of the world did during the Second World War and the Holocaust, and I take it for granted that the same kind of barbarity will take place when black people rather than white are in command of armies. White liberals, though, have another perspective entirely on this. If they see a famine in Africa, they do not say to themselves as I do, aha, those greedy swine in power have stolen all the aid money and either squirreled it away in Swiss banks or spent it on guns. That must be why everybody in the country is so hungry. Instead, they blame the global banking system and the legacy of slavery and colonialism. Everything which happens in Africa must ultimately be made to look like the fault of white people rather than black. This is an awful way of viewing the world because at the back of such people's minds is the idea that black people are really more noble than us, if a little more simple-minded. Such people are unable to be as greedy and cruel as we are. This is patronising nonsense and shows how little these white liberals really think about their fellow men and women in Africa. Even when there is hideous violence in black countries, it can usually be brushed aside by focusing on one very good person rather than looking at all those corpses. Which of course is why the film Hotel Rwanda was so hugely popular and won so many awards. With it, white people simply lapped it up. The ghastly fighting and mass murder in Rwanda, which claimed the lives of 1 million or so people, now fades into the background because we have a saintly and noble person to look at instead. A saintly and noble black person who is an example to us all and behaves better than most white people would under similar circumstances by rescuing 1,000 poor people from being murdered regardless of their tribe and even at risk of his own life. What a guy. The problem with this little fairy tale for the middle class liberals is of course that it is completely false. And after having laden down their good Africa with trophies and awards, it is discovered that he's just as great a scoundrel as all the others who were involved in the Rwandan genocide. The man in question is Paul Rusesabagina. He's a member of the Hutu ethnic group. He was the manager of a hotel in 1994 at a time when Rwanda was tearing itself apart with genocide and civil war. He was appointed manager of a hotel in which the United Nations peacekeeping forces were based and where they were protecting members of the Tutsi ethnic group from being murdered by Hutus. Rusesabagina claimed that it was he who was sheltering all those hundreds of people, but some of the survivors allegedly not only extorted money from them, but also provided the Hutu murder gangs with a list of room numbers where Tutsi were hiding. The United Nations forces who are present have denounced Rusesabagina in no uncertain terms. They say he's a liar. After the end of the fighting, Rusesabagina left Rwanda and settled in the West, where he did very well indeed as a public speaker. He managed to buy homes in both Belgium and Texas. He collaborated with having a Hollywood film made of his version of events, which those actually present, including the United Nations forces, say is thoroughly false and misleading. It proved a great success, though, for the reasons which I mentioned above. Apart from anything else, it provided the breakthrough for the actress Sophie Okonedo, with whom English viewers may be familiar. Rusesabagina was showered with honours, and the film itself, nominated for 2 Oscars, won many awards. What nobody, least of all the fawning white people who had adopted him, noticed was that all the while Paul Rusesabagina was playing an active part in the activities of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, which the United Nations has accused of carrying out terrorist acts which have killed hundreds of people. They specifically target women and children. He also founded his own military group, the FLN, which has also carried out terrorist actions. Paul Rusesabagina was tried for these activities and last month was sent to prison for 25 years. I always enjoy it when people who have an almost mystical belief in the inherent innocence and goodness of black people from Africa find that they can be just as awful as the rest of us.